It is clear that we must find an African solutions for our problems, and that divided we are weak. United, Africa could become one of the greatest forces for good in the world. That is the word of Kwame Nkrumah. Hi everyone, you're welcome to my platform. I'm Ifeanyi Chukwani, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about the pact, the continuation of colonization. But before I get down, do you think colonization has actually ended? Or has it metamorphosed? That's the right English I can figure out now. Or has it metamorphosed to neocolonialism? What do you think? My friend African Jesus said, all Africans got from independence was a flag and a national anthem. And it sounds funny, but it seems like it is that way, because the colonial masters still have a lot of influence on us. But before I talk about the colonial influence on Africans, I would want to say this. Colonialism has not ended yet. In fact, it has now been changed to neo-colonialism. And neo-colonialism today is akin to imperialism in its last and most dangerous stage, and it's one of our biggest problems in Africa. See, the essence of neo-colonialism today is such that any state under it is in theory, sovereign, has all the international collaboration of a sovereign state. But in reality, its economic and political systems are controlled from the outside. And as you know, any state under the grip of neo-colonialism cannot be master of its own destiny. Don't we see this in most African nations? Neo-colonialism is the path for the continuation of colonization. And it is the control of less developed nations by developed nations through indirect means. The term was first used after the Second World War on the continuing dependence of foreign nations by former colonies. But if you check out this now, has it actually ended? Neocolonialism now is more systemically used by the West to exploit poor African countries. This is what I'm saying. I actually have a fact. In 1957, top heads of government from Europe gathered in Paris and had a meeting where they discussed and agreed that they are going to include overseas territories within the European Common Market. And the reason they wanted to do this, or they did this, was for their own self-interest, not for those nations that they want to onboard. So fast track to the 60s and 70s, when African nations got her independent. They were onboarded. Some of them were onboarded, and you know how it played out. The French, even to this day, still have present in their former colonies, and their reason for doing that was to always get cheap labor and raw materials, and also truncate the growth of all those developing African nations. And it actually worked. If you were observant of what happened during the Cold War, you would observe or understand that the Cold War facilitated the decolonization of Africa, and at the same time gave the West the opportunity to infiltrate or have deeper access to African affairs, and also to our seas. There's a US policy known as the Truman Doctrine. Under that policy, the US offered huge sum of funds to any government that is willing to accept US protection against communism. And this enabled the US to extend their influence globally and also have some foreign nations under their control. And I want you to also remember that the West at that time ensured the subordination of most African states by interfering in our conflict and helping install regimes that are stooges to them. The negative effect of neocolonialism is that it comes to us like AIDS. But in reality, it operates through investment of multinational corporations in a way that, while it enriches a few in the underdeveloped country, it keeps all the country as a whole in a constant state of dependency. And we see this in most sub-Saharan African countries. But the worst part of it is that it makes most African countries, or leaves them as reservoirs for cheap labors and raw materials. Take for instance Congo. Congo is one of the countries where they get most of what is used to produce the electronics, our phones, laptops, or all the electronics we use. But that is just it, nothing more. Congo has to remain underdeveloped for that reason. There is this dependency theory orchestrated by the political and the economic world order, which creates a cycle that the underdeveloped countries are supposed to only offer cheap labors and raw materials to the world market, and then it will be sold to the advanced economy, which has the means to transform it to finished goods. And then the poor underdeveloped countries are expected to buy those finished products, thereby depleting their production capacity. And then this vicious cycle perpetuates the division of the world economy between the rich and the poor. I read a book, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And the information in that book was so huge and deep. It was published in 1965, and in less than 1 year that it was released, it actually provoked a kind of political reaction from the US, such that the author, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, was overthrown by a military coup which was abetted by the United States. You see, the US and the West are still very much involved in our political and economic systems. They don't mind eliminating any African that will stand on their way, even till this day, 2022. But they can only do that with the help of an African. I want you guys to know that underdevelopment in Africa, in most African countries actually, is artificial. And neocolonialism keeps Africa artificially poor. The position of the West and most African leaders is the reason for the lack of development in Africa, nothing more. I know you must be wondering about the information in the book I told you I read, that Kwame Nkrumah wrote. He actually simply talked about the concept of neocolonialism, and he said we Africans should be wary of potential regressive impact of unregulated form of aid, trade, and foreign direct investment in Africa in relation to poverty reduction and the well-being of Africa. He actually stressed in that book that African independence can be reduced to mere flag independence if we do not have control over external policy interference and economic control by the outside. Just recently, the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, an EU-backed G8 initiative, has been seen to work with or facilitate land grabbing in Africa, and it has defeated their purpose. And this is one of the few things that the West have been doing. I will end today's topic by saying we can only move from underdeveloped to developed by first defeating neocolonialism. As Thomas Sankara rightly said, he who feeds you controls you. Thank you so much for spending time. Kindly like, share, and subscribe. Bye.